Hello and welcome to the Quarantined Wargamer. I'm Bigly, and today I want to discuss how we learn rules and are there new methods we can use to help us learn new rule sets. So what's the easiest way for you to learn a new rule set? Personally, I've never been one able to sit down and read a whole set of rules cover to cover. No matter how interested I am, I find it really hard to focus when just sitting down and reading. I've always been like this. And way back in the midst of time when I was a university student, I instinctively sought out alternative ways to study rather than just reading books. So fast forward 4 decades, and now I actually understand that the reason I did that was because people learn in different ways can broadly be categorised into 4 types of learners. So there are visual learners, students who best synthesise information when it's presented to them in graphic form. So they respond really well to things like arrows and charts and diagrams and visual information, but not necessarily to photographs or videos, although some can. They're sometimes described as holistic learners because they absorb information best when it's presented to them as a whole. They get to see the big picture. Then there's auditory learners, and a lot of people fall in this category, including myself. And these are most successful when they're given the opportunity to hear information presented to them vocally. They respond well to verbal cues, to discussion groups, activity, written work that's spoken aloud. So they often reading back their own work to themselves is really useful. Then there's reading and writing learners, the students who work really best when they do just read a textbook. So they do really well with internet learning because that tends to be very much text heavy. So they do a lot of online reading, reading of textbooks. They can absorb large amounts of information in that way, and they process it and recall it very well later. Then there's kinesthetic learners. Now these are hands-on learners, participatory people who really need to take a physically active role in the learning process in order to achieve their, in order to understand what they're doing. They sometimes referred as tactile learners, but basically what they do is they tend to engage all of their senses simultaneously in the process of learning. Now I would sort of argue that there's actually a 5th type of learner, the sort of person that doesn't neatly fit into one of those categories. For example, I see myself as a sort of a mix of an auditory and a kinesthetic learner, but we'll come back to more on that later. So now that you've perhaps identified what sort of learner you are, now we should look at some useful techniques that you can employ when learning rules easier. Now some of these techniques are lifted straight from the academic world where people need to absorb large amounts of information, but there's also some practical examples that I've employed privately and professionally over the years. They're not in any particular order. Not all the techniques will be good for everyone, so let's see what's available. So there's something called distributed practice. Now this is where you learn information and you leave large amounts of gaps between one session and the next, maybe more than a day for instance. And what this does is it helps to switch your mind from a more focused mode to a more diffused way of thinking. What you're doing in effect is processing that information in the background, and it's often unconscious. And it helps you to shift that learning from your immediate memory, short-term memory, into your long-term memory. This is ideal for players that belong to clubs where they may play short games every week for several months. By the end, you'll have mastered the rules in a way that no solo player probably could have. Now there's a method called self-explanation. Now this is a technique where you explain to yourself out loud. Now unsurprisingly, this is a good technique for auditory learners. So if you're learning a section of rules or movement for instance, try and explain to yourself how and why they work, what the special circumstances are that you need to remember, special rules. And apparently this works especially well for deep thinkers out there. Now needless to say, this technique suits solo players who don't often have an opponent or a club with whom to discuss the rules. Just make sure your family don't catch you talking to yourself. It's probably the final straw after years of ignoring your strange obsession with little metal men. Now there's an academic technique called elaborative interrogation, and basically what it means is that in much the same way as self-explanation, you ask yourself a question. You basically keep saying why does this work this way, or what about in this circumstance. So if you stumble across a particular technique or solution, ask yourself a question: why does it work? And now a major drawback of this method is it consumes a lot of time. You end up going down all sorts of rabbit holes looking through the rule book, and you end up finding one rule that impacts on another, and you flick through. the benefit of this is that you get to understand where everything is in the rulebook really well. So when you're trying to prove to your opponent that that rule that you employed against him worked, you can go straight to that page in the rulebook. Then there's something called audio-visual reinforcement, basically, which means watch videos, listen to podcasts, read battle reports. And all of this is a way of absorbing the rules. You learn new things, maybe one little bit of a rules from one person and one bit from another. Watch the how to play type videos. There's loads available, and really good companies like Two Fat Lardies, for instance, put loads of those sort of things out to support their rule sets. Seek them out, watch them, but do it with the rule book in hand so you can look up what they're talking about. Now, there's something that will be familiar to all of us, playtesting. If you're lucky enough to be part of a club, you get to play the rules on a regular basis. You can dive straight in, learn from your peers, and you're playing over and over again, and you're practically learning the rules. But solo playtesters can do this as well. You don't need to play a full game. You don't even need to worry about army lists or even proper train. Just throw some models down on the table and play through a particular aspect of the rules a few times while you read them from the book. Now, this is a great method that suits kinesthetic learners particularly. So now, I recognise that I'm much more of an auditory and a hands-on type of learner. So for instance, I take in much more by playing a game than I do by simply reading the rules. And once I have a basic grasp of what's going on, then I go back to the rules for specifics. I know what questions to ask myself, such as what aspects of a set of rules I do not understand, and where I can find clarification. Probably not alone in this approach, and it sort of employs lots of different techniques at the same time. I'm often called upon to give presentations as part of my job. My audience ranges from professionals through to the general public, and sometimes I find that when you're working with a mixed audience like this, a good audio-visual stimuli are needed to help process information, get it across. The same applies when you're trying to read a set of rules. Simply reading them off the page is not enough. I nearly always try to find a tutorial video or a playthrough or off of YouTube before delving into the rulebook itself. Now, a good example of that is that I recently bought the Chain of Command rules, like the Two Fat Lardies, and before spending my cash on the rulebook, I went online and I found a load of playthrough videos that they'd done, and I found other players that put videos on. And I'll often watch these through, go back to the rules and see where they've got it from, try to understand a bit more. But it's a great way of learning, particularly if you're having to do it on your own, as many of us are at the moment because clubs are shut. And it's particularly useful when you're dealing with a novel set of rules that perhaps isn't widely available. Maybe the manufacturers, the writers haven't put a lot of information out there, but there's nearly always a player out there who enthuses about those rules and has put some information out. Blogs are great for that because we play a wide range of games, not necessarily the most commercially available. So go and hunt around on the internet, see what you can find, because I'm sure you'll find something to help you understand and learn rules a lot better than if you were just doing it on your own. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. I hope that maybe there's some techniques in there that you can employ. Now, if you found the video interesting, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Of course, you can always unsubscribe later when I start to get on your nerves. As always, please leave your comments below or over on my blog, Big Lee's Miniature Adventures. So it just leaves me to say, as usual, that I hope everyone's keeping well and managing whatever the lockdown rules are in your area, because they seem to be different everywhere for 1,000 different circumstances. So whatever they are in your area, or whatever country you live in for that matter, I hope that you're staying well and you're managing to navigate the lockdown rules, and that you're keeping gaming as much as possible. And of course, keep rolling high.